it's a different paradigm that's going to need to keep chugging along if we are to hit 20% of all energy coming from solar globally by 2050.
Hey there, Solar Warriors. I'm Nico Johnson, and this is Suncast. Each week, I pull back the veil on the life and business insights of clean tech entrepreneurs building the most noble and impactful companies of our time. I hope what you learn from this conversation is a catalyst for your own growth. So thanks for tuning in, and welcome to our tribe. Hey, welcome back, Solar Warrior. I am thrilled that you've chosen to spend yet another week and your precious time with us here on Suncast. And I'm excited to bring you today's guest. Today's entrepreneur has enjoyed a broad 22-year career in the solar PV, clean energy innovation, climate change activism, and climate resiliency consulting sectors. Rarely do I meet executives with such passion and wide-ranging interests as my new friend, Dave Buemi. A huge shout out to our mutual friend, Blair Kendall, for insisting that I meet and interview this solar pioneer. Our mutual love of kitesurfing and energy issues created a fun and inviting atmosphere to discuss topics as wide-ranging as the economic viability of the Perovskite technology that he's currently commercializing, all the way to Dave's top 3 list of interests to pursue in the workplace. The founding story and team of Energy Materials Corporation, the company he presently represents, has deep credibility, so I now believe that if anyone can pull off commercial scale perovskite, it's them. But don't take my word for it. Hope you'll have a listen and judge for yourself. And afterward, I encourage you to head to mysuncast.com and check out the catalog of 200 other inspiring and influential leaders' stories. Get on the mailing list so we can stay in touch, and you'll know first when the next episode drops. For now, get ready to tune up your skills, Solar Warrior, as we tune in to another powerful conversation here on Suncast. All right, today on Suncast, we have an entrepreneur and solar energy leader with 20 plus years experience in the space, who has spent a significant amount of time helping launch and grow innovation and technology for clean energy, a lot of experience with federal programs and broad experience at many levels of the organization, growing and selling products into the solar space. Mr. Dave Buemi, welcome to Suncast.
Thanks, Nico. I'm really happy to be here.
Can you give me an insight into your first exposure or foray into the power business and how you knew this is where you wanted to focus the next stage of your career?
The sporting goods industry was fun. When I was getting ready to leave, people were like, "Are you out of your mind? That's my dream job. Why would you leave that?" But for me, I've got 2 things that go on. I'm highly curious. It's a blessing and a curse, and I've got this altruistic piece and looking at a solar project and a wind project that a developer that was way ahead of their time in the early 90s showed me a pro forma and wanted me to critique the business plan and the pro forma in it. And I had no idea what I was looking at, of course, when it was a widget guy selling widgets. And it really got my interest. I really understood the trade-offs and the problems of energy generation back then, mostly because I'd read the seminal publication Limits to Growth. Those couple of things got me really thinking about, wow, this is a really interesting industry and it's got to happen. It wasn't happening back then, right? So I transitioned out of the sporting goods industry and windsurfing and water sports and started my own consulting firm because there wasn't a lot of companies back then to go apply to. And I did consulting to small mom and pop shops that were doing small solar projects, mostly residential. One gentleman that was doing a federal project, the first DoD project. In fact, when you drive by DoD and the Pentagon, you'll see a digital readout on one of the highways that shows how much solar energy they're producing. That was for that first project. For me, it was a way to get an education, a paid education in a new industry.
Well, Dave, it's really interesting for me. You started out consulting, sort of bridging that gap between knowledge and action. How do you go from consulting in the wind industry to working for one of the early SIGs players?
A lot of people don't realize this now. Back then, if there was a story about solar in the national press, I mean, it was like a cause for celebration, right? There was very little press, and I was scanning it and running agents, and this thing about Daystar Technologies getting funded popped up. And so I reached out to them, and essentially they needed somebody that could do federal work, helping them to secure funding for further development of their manufacturing lines, the product, et cetera. So I signed on to help them finding capital from the labs or from DoD, which we actually were successful in doing with DoD. And then in the middle of that, I took over marketing to help rebrand the company or update the brand, really, and some basic marketing back then.
What's different about the way that you guys thought about and marketed Daystar in those late 90s, early 2000s, and how the solar industry's evolved now?
Daystar was a startup, right? So that was marketing was all geared toward the investor community. Interestingly, back then, we didn't have a product yet, so we weren't doing product marketing, but the market situation there was such that the few companies that really understood thin film and its ability to create more energy in low light and hotter temperatures, hotter ambient temperatures, they came to us. So we were selling pre-production orders early on. But the basic marketing was always geared back then toward the investment community.
Daystar was well funded. It was one of the early companies to break out as a SIGs player. How did you pivot from Daystar into Suniva? What was the catalyst for that?
That company needed I can't remember the number. It was roughly $300 to $500 million to get to full commercialization. It was so the original funding involved taking the company public, which for a startup is a really difficult road because now you're at the quarter-to-quarter masters, and you've got to show some progress. So it was difficult. There was a change of leadership, so I moved on to and co-founded a startup with a very smart rocket engineer, believe it or not. Not a rocket scientist, but one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. And it was a solar trigeneration product that sat on the roofs of commercial buildings, and it allowed non-diffuse light to get into buildings through a louvered embodiment. It produced electricity, and it also produced hot water. Similar to cogenera, or very much different? Somewhat similar, yeah. But it's again that daylighting into buildings was a really unique piece, and the retailers loved it, right? Because when you flood a space, I learned retail space with natural light. Documented studies, number of them show that retail sales go up a lot. So that was a company. It was called Bright Phase Energy. We took that to a probable Series A round, and this was all done with existing technologies and a proprietary engineering, so we didn't need a lot of capital to get commercial. We had a supermarket chain signing on to buy a certain amount, and then after many years of not taking vacations and working hard on that, I went down to Grand Canyon for 3 weeks, or 2.5 weeks, came out of the Grand Canyon where there's no communications, and Lehman Brothers had gone down, and 2008 had gone down. And like a lot of startups, we ended up, not going forward. And at that point, that's a long way to answer your question. I went over to Suniva, and that was really my first corporate gig, so to speak, or at least full corporate gig.
Right, one that you weren't an early member in, yeah.
Correct, yeah.
I get it, 2008, federal global financial crisis. You decide to wind the company down. You go to Suniva, and thus began a pretty decent tranche of your career, really working on federal strategy for larger international companies. How do you feel the work that you had done with Daystar and with Bright Phase really prepared you for the work at Suniva, and then later you went to Gerlicher and Empower Energies? You've worked with some of the really impressive companies in the space.
The federal market is probably one of the most interesting marketplaces to work in because it's all RFP based, mostly, extremely bureaucratic. The challenges to winning business are really large, but it's really intriguing at the same time. It can be incredibly frustrating. It's a space, though, that gives you sales chops, so to speak, because it requires a fair amount of grit and a fair amount of creativity to navigate it. So, for me, self-teaching the federal space, is I think unusual in that most people go into it through a major corporation and their procurement group and, like a defense contractor or something like that. So it definitely provided me a basis for, the stick-to-itness, I'll say.
You have, similar to me, found yourself in a position where you are often early into a company that is commercializing a new take on a product or a completely new product in a category. Is there a particular reason why you've migrated towards those companies? Is it something about the way that piece of the market that really inspires you? What are your thoughts on the early stage companies versus late stage developed companies?
I've always been wired for sort of innovation, new services, new products, technology. It's just, when I look back on my career at this point, I've seen it all along. Even when I started my career in the sporting goods industry, I was working on diversification strategies into whole new industries. And that's just a mindset I have. I also, when I look at that, I think it's the ambiguity that exists because you have no history generally with something new. There's nothing to fall back on. I mean, you're working on intuition and, again, just pure grit, to make it happen. So I think, I've done two types of entrepreneurial endeavors. One, where rank startup, done that a couple times, and then corporate sponsored entrepreneurship within an existing mature company.
Right, entrepreneurship.
Yeah, entrepreneurship. And both of them have their interesting pieces. And, a lot of people go, well, it must be so much easier in a large corporation. And it's somewhat a lot harder because you're working with people that are not entrepreneurs and have been 25 years at GM, and then they came over to this company, and now they're managing a team of entrepreneurs, and they have no idea. So it's a really interesting dynamic.
And you can't really go out and raise capital. You're beholden to budgeting conversations.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And a lot of the times, the C-suite has no idea this is even going on.
Well, you have recently taken on a project that is probably why many have clicked on listen for this episode. That could be, and that's simply put, the topic of perovskite as an alternative to silicon for power generation has been bubbling for a few years now. And, it's one of those things that a lot of folks incumbent in the industry have an inherent interest in seeing the very notion of perovskite sort of not make it. So I'd love to talk a little bit about a company that believes very much in the fact that it will make it. You are working with a company out of New York called Energy Materials Corp, founded by, or run at least, by Stephen DeLuca, the CEO, who was at Daystar while you were there, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That's correct. He came in and took over the CEO position from the original founder CEO.
Help me understand how you made your way into the wild, wild west of perovskite and what problem Energy Materials Corporation is working to solve.
I met him last summer. Again, we reconnected, and he started telling me the story of solar cell material, really easy to work with. You're working with it at the atomic level, at the molecular level, not the atomic level so much. You can use existing printing systems and really fast, and we can lower the cost by 50%. All the things that you heard from Clean Tech 101, Solar and Clean Tech 101 back in the mid-2000s. And I worked for one of them, which was Daystar Technologies. A similar story. Existing technology, we're going to take Seagate hard drive manufacturing machines and make SIGs. And I just said, again, dude, I don't know if I can do this. Sounds really similar. That is one of the challenges that we'll talk about in a bit about getting the company funded. So perovskite's this material that was being used as part of the inorganic solar cell stacks that were worked on 10, 15 years ago. A company called Daystar, a few others. And what they learned in that is that the perovskite compound was actually all by itself an amazing photoreactive material, to build an entire cell device out of. It occurs naturally in nature. I mean, but it's pretty far down in the Earth's crust, so it's hard to get at. But interestingly, perovskite can be synthetically manufactured because you need so little of it, and the materials that go into it to manufacture it are not raw materials that you have to worry about going into undersupply. You're not constrained at all. It's this sort of almost miraculous material. And this, people started working with it, academic institutions, in 2011 approximately, at a 2% efficient solar cell. And here we are, 8-9 years later at 24-25% solar cell efficiency. So it's a material that, because it's quite easy to work with, you can print it in a solution, in a coating and solution type system, like you make a celluloid film, like Kodak makes celluloid film. Steve DeLuca's brilliance and strategy here was to not go and try to reinvent all kinds of things, but was to bring together in what we call an innovation mashup. So you're bringing together Kodak with their existing printing lines, all vertically integrated under one roof. Those systems are, they're the 100-year undisputed leader in high-speed roll-to-roll printing. We can talk a little bit more about that. And then bring Corning into it with their flexible willow glass, which is another just an amazing material science triumph. Very thin, ultra thin, flexible glass to make modules on. Bringing the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in to license and work with their perovskite group that has currently, I think it's a 24% efficient cell in the lab. So those are the three main partners. NREL and DOE are involved in the company also.
So Stephen, to his credit, has created this company, Energy Materials Corporation, as you refer to it, an innovation mashup, instead of going and creating something in his own, effectively, as many great leaders do, taking existing technologies and compiling them. One of the things that blows me away is the success and scale that you guys have been able to accomplish in a very short amount of time. Can you talk about that and kind of what you guys are doing in the Kodak factory up in New York?
Kodak has, again, this 100-year history of leadership in high-speed film production, making film for all the old style cameras, right? Although, Kodak, when you say Kodak these days, people go, oh God, are they still in business? Because they missed, everybody knows, they teach us in business school, they missed the digital camera train. That doesn't take anything away from the fact that they still manufacture film for the motion picture industry and other industries. And everything that was done at that company at a functional level of manufacturing is just unbelievable. The story is amazing. It would take us a whole separate show to talk about it. But the factory itself, where we're doing this work, is one very large building, as they all are on the Kodak campus. And vertically integrated under that roof is a production line, or a production process that starts with a pilot line where you test and prove the coding and printing of a new product. And then you get that up to a full operational capacity of whatever the product is. And then you transition that over to a full scale line that's upstairs in the building. That full scale line is just so impressive. For us, it's a 3 gigawatt a year building block, which is unheard of. 3 gigawatts a year of module manufacturing. In the ground floor, all of the ink solutions and other solutions are mixed, and the recipes are made there and then put into vats that then feed through piping up through the floor to the 3 gigawatt machine. And it's a 8-station process. So on one end, you have a roll of flexible Corning glass, big roll of it, and that's running through all of these stations. And on the other end comes out a giant roll of effectively one big solar module. Then you take that roll and you cut modules to size. You finish the module piece itself, which is essentially at full production. We're taking that material, that solar module material, cutting it, sealing it, putting a J box in it, and shipping it. It's that different from a current solar module process where you've got 5 discrete steps in a crystalline module process, and then you've got 250 individual steps in those 5 processes. This is a 2-step process with about 25 individual processes. And the Kodak facility is just so impressive because you watch the system operate, and the speed is just astounding.
We were talking in our last call about how in the span of, I think it was 8 months, you got to an efficiency level that, that would make other thin film blush. And you're doing a rate of 50 feet per minute production. And this is on a few $1 million investment. Is that accurate?
So the company is working on something called pilot line Scaleup. So versus a ramp up of a line, this is about scaling up and the recipe so that we are making a solar cell eventually at our commercial drop-off point of 50%. That's where we want to get to. And when you do that, the speed piece is where operating capital efficiency comes in. The faster you go, the greater the gross margin. It's just astounding. So in the past 9 months, the company's gone from a 2% at a very slow speed to something that's nearing our end objective of 18% to commercialize at a cost that would be significantly less than what a current crystalline module is. I'm being a little vague here because some of this stuff that the company just, we don't put out there right now. But we are already more than 3/4 of the way there, efficiency wise, and we're close. We're ramping toward that 50 feet per minute. So this has never really been done before at this kind of speed and efficiency, and in that time frame that I know of in the industry.
I think one of the things that stands out to me is how much you've been able to accomplish with relatively little investment thus far. Obviously, there's some in-kind contribution from partners like Horning and Kodak and the University of North Carolina in this mashup. I just want to be able to put the magnitude of this into the listeners' ears, right? When you think about Daystar, when you think about Solyndra, some of the well-understood, well-known failures in the past, especially around thin film, most did not have the success of First Solar, for example. And thus the sort of the market change, the market shift that everyone would say, oh, right. And, we thought thin film was going to do this great thing, and it didn't. It flopped because of crystalline silicon. What we're talking about here is a fundamental shift that will effectively crater the crystalline silicon market when commercialized successfully. Is that accurate?
I don't think the last part of your statement is completely accurate, in that I think the crystalline industry has an enormous amount of invested money in it, and it's a different paradigm that's going to need to keep chugging along if we are to hit 20% of all energy coming from solar globally by 2050.
Is this manufacturing process, though, that the incumbents will just adopt, and it'd be easy for them to add a line of perovskite manufacturing?
Correct.
Yeah.
At some point, I mean, this is highly contentious in the industry, and
of course,
we try to walk gently around saying, outrageous statements about any part of the industry right now, because it's all needed if we're going to make essentially 20% of all energy by 2050. Means starting next year, we have to install 500 gigawatts of solar every year until 2050. And it's going to need all participants and all efforts, and it's going to need innovation, and it's going to, not just in modules, but across the PV supply chain. And it's going to need existing players to innovate, but also keep producing.
Hey, Warrior, I've always thought that commercial solar should just have an easy button for financing, the way that residential solar typically has had. But credit has always been a gating issue. Until now. Energetic Insurance levels the playing field so that project developers can now offer the same electricity savings to small and medium-sized businesses that were previously reserved for the large commercial buyers in the U.S. alone. Their Interrate credit cover policy provides the missing link, that easy button I mentioned earlier, for commercial solar that a FICO score provided to residential solar, which enables savvy developers and investors to quickly finance commercial solar projects. You can check it out at mysuncast.com/energetic and submit your projects today. Hey, 70% of projects qualify, and the review process is easy. Go to mysuncast.com/energetic. Hey, are you losing commercial solar sales because of high demand charges that minimize the ROI for your customer? Extensible Energy's Demand X software is an affordable new solution for reducing peak demand charges by 30%. No batteries required. Extensible's intelligent software analyzes solar production, utility rates, weather data, and more. Then it crunches that data, monitors solar and flexible loads, and automatically reduces peak demand spikes, increasing your customers' ROI and decreasing payback time. Head to extensibleenergy.com/Suncast for a free demand charge analysis for your project and to learn more about Extensible's partner program for commercial solar installers. You can learn more at extensibleenergy.com/Suncast.
Can we talk about the target market price and the target CapEx reduction? Because that's where I think it gets interesting in terms of just really forcing incumbents to take note and to incorporate it into their plans.
So what's really interesting is that there's two things going on in perovskite modules, right? You've got people out there, Oxford PV has gotten a fair amount of financing, really smart people. They are taking a perovskite and that they're doing in a vapor deposition, which is a multi-step process, not roll to roll. And then they're laminating that, so to speak, I'm using very broad brushstrokes here, to an existing crystalline solar cell. And the play there is to bring LCOE down a lot, even though that cost of that may go up, by trying to get to an efficiency of 26, 27%. The other way is just a pure perovskite cell, which is what we're working on, doing that in a high-speed roll-to-roll. You have a couple of companies that are working on inkjet printing of perovskites, which is, you can understand is not a high-speed process, but you can make small modules and use them for things like off-grid and, camping and things like that. Where EMC, what we believe is leading the market, is being able to use these existing facilities and come with a product very quickly, like within the next 24 months, to the marketplace that is 50% less cost, average selling price, than projected best-in-class monocrystalline, is how we model them. The CapEx for the factory is almost negligible because we're using an existing factory. But even when we build new greenfield factories, which is our greater vision, is to start building factories quickly, the coating and printing machine itself, plus the factory build out, is about $110 million. It's tiny compared to other facilities doing similar output. And that's $110 million gets you a 3 gigawatt factory.
Yeah, that's orders of magnitude smaller, right? That's like 90% less CapEx then.
90% less CapEx on average, depending on.
And for those quants that are doing the math, best in class current silicon crystalline projections are in the very low 20 cents per watt. So and you're
around 24 cents. Yeah.
Correct. And you're projecting a 50% reduction in that. And that's unbelievable.
Again, roughly, but these, when you listen to startups, and we've all listened to all kinds of stuff over the years, you hear a lot of claims like this, and I'm always suspect. But here, the story is different because of this history of Kodak and their understanding of the numbers and it's not like I talked about before, the ambiguity of a startup where you have no history. We've got these partners that all have history to draw on to be able to then come to somewhat precise numbers on where we're heading. And that's really exciting for me.
What about the naysayers, Dave? Those who say that perovskite fails in the light of day? I
used to be one of them. I was like, yeah, it's a great product, except that you put it out in the sun, it doesn't work, or it works for 10 minutes, right? So interestingly, we talked about perovskite and how quickly the efficiency went up in the lab, right?
Yeah.
Interestingly, the same thing is happening with stability, light-induced degradation, and that stability. And if you look at a perovskite cartoon of a cell stack, on either side of the cell are the electron transfer layers, and that, it turns out, those materials that were being used early on were the problems of the degradation. If you look at any recent, and I'll just back up and say that the internet is just littered with perovskites. The titles are like "Perovskites: The Future is Solar," but will they last, et cetera. And a journalist loves a hero-villain story, right? It's perfect. But if you look at recent stuff, you'll see that the light-induced degradation stability is I don't want to say solved, but it's way, way along the way. I mean, obviously, Oxford PV, the other company I mentioned, is getting ready to put a commercial product out, with perovskite laminated silicon. That light induced degradation piece is well understood. And then the other piece that comes up all the time under the heading of stability is environmental stability. Way back when, it was very unsure whether standard packaging systems, laminating that we're using on crystalline materials or glass like First Solar would work for perovskites. And the short story is they work perfectly. And that is a checkbox to be checked. I think the third piece that comes up all the time is the minuscule amount of lead that's in a perovskite solar cell. Lead obviously is something that creates concern. We've been trying to get it out of the environment. But the amount of lead in a perovskite module is actually quite a bit smaller than the amount of cadmium you'd find in a First Solar module, like significantly smaller. I can go on and on about lead. I mean, there's a whole recycling stream out there, so it's very mature. Lead is never going to go into a short supply. And with like the industry has recycling systems out there for modules as they come out. This is just another module we put into that stream.
Where does this really start to get fun and groundbreaking for you in the coming 12, 24 months?
Well, a couple things. So first is closing our next round of funding is fun. I'm working on that with Steve and the team diligently. And I think the other piece that's fun that we're already having interesting conversations. For me, this is the part that I love in a startup is early stage orders for product.
Yeah.
Very specific mindset, a very specific partner and company that will do that. And the forward-looking, mostly developers, but also some finance companies we've talked to are interested in, we have what we call our advanced partner pre-production sale program, so that we have a bankability process in place. That's one leg of it. Where we're getting modules out in the field with our partners quickly. They're being monitored and tested along with other bankability measures, but that's a big one to be able to have out there really quickly.
Yeah, the whole idea about bankability is it's the Achilles heel of any new tech especially trying to enter into a market driven by ever lower PPA prices and merchant prices in a utility scale market, right? What are some of the key things that you've seen, broadly speaking, not just the EMC, but the products that you've brought to market that really are core requirements for achieving bankability and getting these products into the hands of developers and actually into projects?
So I think the first piece of that is getting products out in the field and immediately getting a monitoring system on it, preferably by a third party. Money spent in the bankability phase is well spent for your rapid acceleration downstream to sales. Obviously there's been insurance programs out there that had sort of okay acceptance, but there's holes in those insurance programs as far as longevity and some other things that just, it makes them difficult to work. Investors that are in the company and their stature can really help depending on who they are, what they are, et cetera. And then, of course, our partners are themselves that bring confidence to the product itself and being out in the marketplace. But I think the thing that's really interesting about bankability has always kind of made me laugh is that in order to get on, like, Bloomberg's, tier 1 list, it essentially requires some investor to take a lot of risk to do it, because they basically say it has to have been funded by 5 different investors. So it's just so funny to me, because that's basically punting the bankability thing down the road. That list is almost immaterial to me. So it's and I'll probably get in trouble for saying that, but
you won't be the first.
It's a guide that the finance industry likes to have, right? But there's a number of other factors there that are really important. And given that modules are 45% of the cost of a complete system, I get that that's, neat. I don't mean to sound cavalier. It's a really important thing to figure out. And it's up to us to be able to bring a product to market with a bankability story that relieves heartburn.
When you look back over your career, is there a failure that you feel like most affected the direction that you've gone?
Yeah, the biggest failure I've had early on was not understanding the management cultures that I was working in and reacting in a way that wasn't good for my career or my position in that company. I think that the management early on, I just wasn't understanding management culture, and the cultures that were managing from a place of fear just were so atypical or so not what I was about. And really hard time with that, really hard time seeing the human toll was taking on people across it. So I didn't react well in those. And so the broader heading is not understanding management culture.
I guess similarly, is there a time where you think back and it was really a milestone or a mile marker for you, success or a turning point in your career?
Yeah, understanding, again, this is more psychological than an actual event, but understanding self-esteem and self-doubt limitations. I say this, I've said this recently in a forum, in a talk that I was involved with, and, low self-esteem is a national health crisis, and it's probably worse in the U.S. than it is anywhere else in the country. I don't know what it is about our culture, but, at this point, or being a recovering self-doubter, I see it in meeting settings. I see it socially. It's really an interesting phenomenon. It's really an efficiency killer.
That would be a hilarious T-shirt. Recovering self-doubter.
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't it?
Oh, man. Well, Dave, I haven't done a hot or hype segment in a little while. I'd like to do it with you. I'll name a specific market or topic, and you spend 30 or 60 seconds on whether you think it's hot or hype and why. And we'll start with the first one, and that is transactive energy for homeowners or neighborhood blocks. I
don't think that's hype at all. I think that is more, I think it's a really great space. I think if you're going to get really efficient with energy, that kind of transactive capability, and if you wrote blockchain into that, I think it's everything that I've read, I've talked to people about it, I've seen it's hugely promising. Of course, the regulatory piece of that is like a lot of things in our industry is a huge unknown, and how fast that can happen. I think the regulatory holds back that from happening faster than we would all like.
Yeah. How about vehicle to grid and the nexus of distributed generation and e-mobility?
I think that is an enormously important part of the whole decarbonization effort. I don't think it's hype. I think some of it's hyped in certain parts of it, but I think overall it's a part of the industry that is hugely important and is made possible by large scale renewable deployment. So I don't think that's hype at all. I think the other piece that's interesting, if I went a little broader than just automobile and just said transportation, when you look at trucks and things trucks are just an enormous polluting source. There's things going on with batteries, and batteries coupled with green hydrogen that I think are not hype at all.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that. Transportation, rather. Not just automobile vehicles for residential or consumer use. I'm thinking more like mobile battery storage vis-a-vis transportation vehicles and its impact on the ability to stabilize the distribution grid.
I don't view that as hype at all. I just think, again, that's a regulatory thing that we need to work through.
Yeah. All right. Next, connecting some of the dots, and you mentioned this already in one of your previous answers, but blockchain as it relates to energy.
So I get way out of my knowledge base here, but what I know in the early trials in different settings seem to be really promising. Blockchain to me is an industry that is growing by itself outside of energy, and it's a new technology. So I think there's a lot of turns in the road. I see that as not hype.
Yeah.
But again, I'm way out of my knowledge base there.
Fantastic. Well, I'll bring it back to your knowledge base for our last one. This crazy material called perovskite or hype.
Yeah, I think if you ask 90% of your network and industry people, they would say it's hype, just because it has that same kind of entrepreneur, never underestimate an entrepreneur to oversell a concept, right? I do it, we've all done it. And so when you oversell like that, it gets people really suspicious because there's been so many failures. Thin film in general, with the exception of First Solar, which is just an amazing executing company, even with a lot of different CEOs, the people down in the plumbing do an amazing job, but that's the exception. Thin film is generally given anything that smells like that a bad name.
Yeah, well, may EMC be the exception, the First Solar exception in Perovskite.
I don't think it's going to be just EMC. I think there'll be others. I just think EMC is built to be early, and that's what people are having a hard time getting their head around.
What book have you recommended or gifted the most, and why?
All my friends that know me and people I've worked with and have worked for me, they've all pretty much read a book called 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And it is my Bible, and it is by far I think, one of the most important management books, business books that's out there. It is essentially working at the emotional intelligence level, which, when you look at how business is conducted right now, like if you look at the HR process, the intake usually involves somebody taking a personality test like Myers-Briggs, et cetera, which all of those tests have been shown to be completely ineffective and, if in fact, problematic, and none of them have been academically vetted. And the problem with them is they don't go down to the emotional level of the person. So there's actually emotional intelligence testing you can do, which a lot of corporations are using now, some giant ones like Aetna Insurance and smaller ones. So 15 Commitments is all about the emotional realm.
What book or books have shaped and influenced, I presume that one for sure, but your leadership style?
Good to Great, a very old book at this point. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Jim Collins, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's a seminal publication. It really resonated with me and clicked with me. And it's, that humble sort of CEO that they describe in there, and the way they managed is just so that was emotional intelligence that they discovered before there was terminology for it.
What book is on your nightstand?
One of them is was given to me by a rising star in the solar industry, a guy named Ryan Marlborough. I give him total kudos for his great work in forwarding me this book. It's called Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss.
Of course.
You know that book? Yeah.
You're the first to recommend it, but yeah, I and many of my friends have read it.
Yeah, really great. I mean, that's, it's like old telephone book thick, right? So it's something that stays by your nightstand for a while.
An encyclopedia.
Yeah. And then the other book I'm reading is, it's called Losing Earth, written by a guy named Nathaniel Rich. It was, the production of it was financed by the Pulitzer Foundation. And there's a short article out there that people can read. It's in the New York Times. It's called Losing Earth, the Decade We Failed to Stop Climate Change. And when you read that, just read that article. You don't even have to read the book. You go, oh, this is how we got to where we are right now. Essentially, in a nutshell, it's basically back in the 80s, government, environmental organizations, oil and gas, all came together through a series of lengthy meetings over 10 years, and they came to an agreement on how they're going to start working on immediately reducing emissions. Everybody signed off. Everybody said the science was real, including the oil and gas industries. And then, without giving away too much, one of the entities, one of those blocks, which you can guess is oil and gas, left the table at the 11th hour, started a disinformation campaign. So most of the climate denier material you hear out there comes right from that point. So interesting. Great read.
If you have not listened to this, Dave, you really should go check it out. There's a podcast that came out, I think beginning of this year, maybe it might have been like in December of last year, called Drilled by Amy Westervelt. You've got to listen to it. It is just fantastic. It talks about that exact shift.
I don't know that, but thank you for that. I will listen to that.
The misinformation around climate change in particular. Dave, over the arc of your career and your life, what consistent habit or practice has had the greatest impact on you?
So predictably, based on some of the other things I said, you can probably tell that meditation is part of what I do, just present moment meditation. I've done it on and off for a long time, and then more in the last 10 years pretty religiously.
Is there a particular tool or anything that you leverage to help you get into a meditative state?
There is not, but I would highly recommend for people that are either struggling with meditation or don't know how to get into it is to just look up a website for Tara Brach, T-A-R-A Brach. You know her?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Tim Ferriss talks about her a lot. In fact, I listened to a meditation that she has. That's the Smile meditation.
Yeah.
Her loving kindness meditations are really good as well.
Yeah, her guided, all the guided things she offers free is such a great resource.
Yeah, and she's actually recently joined Insight Timer, which is a meditation app I use. So she's joined as a teacher there, and so a lot of her meditations are on there now. Easy to find.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting. Wow.
Yeah, Insight Timer is great. Well, Dave, where can people find out more about you, more about Energy Materials Corporation?
For me, you can find me online and on LinkedIn, of course, and then I have a Twitter account that I'm somewhat active with, not like a lot of people. And then I have a blog that I've written about the PV industry for kind of almost 15 years, and that's currently on hold until I'm going to do a reformat of that and rebuild. And then Energy Material Corporation's website, E like England, N like Nancy, and then MAT, and then corp.com.
Let's end today, as we always do, with a bold prediction. Dave, what one thing do you see happening in the market that maybe nobody else is tracking? What's in your crystal ball?
The one that I'm sure of, and people always fight back on me, is that I think we will see in the near term a complete turn of government and business, but business leading on decarbonization really quickly. I think things are accelerating to a point right now where it's not a if or even it's far off. I think that the panic is setting in. I do work in that space in climate resiliency, do a small amount of consulting from some training I did, and I just see it. I'm a lot of people say I'm out of my mind, but I think, in the next 10 years or less, we will have a large turn. And if we don't, well, it's really interesting.
We'll be looking at and chronicling it here on Suncast. Thanks, Dave Buemi, for joining us on the show today.
Thanks so much, Nico. A real pleasure.
Wow, you are an Outro Credits listener just like me. Well, that makes you a true solar warrior, so I salute you. What do you think? Are you convinced that Perovskite can finally make a viable commercial entry into the solar arms race? I'm eager to hear what your takeaways are and what additional questions it might have sparked for you. Would you mind posting your thoughts on Twitter or LinkedIn? And please tag us. Dave and I would love to hear how this one impacted you. As always, you can find the resources, links, highlights, book recommendations, etc. that we've discussed here today, along with all of our social media links over on the blog at mysuncast.com. And hey, if you're a reader, and I suspect that you are, then you really should consider joining the Suncast Book Club. I've never really opened this up to the public before. It's been part of our private Slack group. We're going to be going through one of the books that Dave recommended in today's episode, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. So for a limited time, I'm opening up our private Slack group that's dedicated to Suncast Tribe members to those of you who might be interested in joining the book club and sharpening the saw along with us. To join, you need to email me at nico@mysuncast.com with book club in the subject line, and I'll send you that private Slack group invite. And hey, speaking of email, please do consider joining the newsletter. If you're listening all the way through this outro, then you're truly a special part of our tribe. I'd like to learn more about you, so please take a moment to participate in our listener survey. You can find that on the homepage of mysuncast.com or linked, as I mentioned, in our newsletter. I'd be honored if you'd take a minute to let me know more about you and how I can mold Suncast into something that serves and piques your interest. Join the newsletter so you don't miss that email, okay? As always, I am so happy that you chose to be here again this week. Remember, you are what you listen to. Thanks again for showing up, Solar Warrior. It's half the battle.